Hello, welcome to week 5 of Intro to Applied Intelligence here at Georgetown University School of Continuing Studies. The only announcement I have, I'm just kind of putting this out if people are interested. I've done it for my in-person class, and I haven't done it for the online class, but what I've done is a Capitol Hill terrain walk, where we walk around Capitol Hill and we talk about the January 6th intelligence failure, the riot, and other security failures around January 6th. And I do that on Capitol Hill itself. I know a good portion of people are doing distance learning here and are out of town. But I just want to gauge the interest if someone wants to do that maybe in December. It'll be a little bit cold, but that's okay. What we'll do is we'll meet at Capitol Hill, last maybe an hour and a half. And we'll walk around, we'll watch videos on your phones of the actual riot itself, and we'll take a tour or we'll walk the path of what the rioters did. Of course, we can't go inside Capitol Hill, but for this, we'll just remain on the outside. So I just want to gauge interest and see if people are local and are willing to do that. If we've got 4 or 5 people who are local and want to do that, then we'll go ahead and do it. And for everyone else, we can zoom in or something along those lines. So let me know if you're interested. Please, when you acknowledge this, let me know if you're interested, and we'll set some time up, probably the last week of the semester in mid-December or so. So week 4 review. Obviously, Iraq WMD and 9/11 were the case studies. So as we go through this, there's failures along the line that you guys read about. There was collection failures. We did not know, we did not have enough assets to properly assess Saddam Hussein's WMD stockpiles and capabilities. For the assets we did have, such as curveball, we really mismanaged that asset. So there was collection failures along the line. There was analytical failures, particularly around the aluminum tubes that were thought to be potential centrifuges. That is a failure in analysis. There was groupthink, where there was a theory that these were centrifuges and all future information was melt around that. So we saw that the analytical failure manifests itself in that way. You could say it manifests itself with the chemical weapons and inability to interpret imagery or analyze imagery properly. So those are the analytical failures. There was the organizational failures. As I mentioned in the lecture, if you are talking to George Tenet, or George Tenet is your key person, and there's no other way to get information out to the policymakers, that's an organizational failure. Because if it's up to the biases and thoughts of one person, all the analysis, then your intelligence apparatus is not sufficient. You also saw organizational failure in the sense that intelligence did not go through the process, and raw data, not analyzed intelligence, but raw data, made its way up to the highest levels of our government without proper analysis or determination if this intelligence is actually valid. So you had those organizational failures, and then you had the policy interface, and that's where the politicization argument comes in, and the Rachel Maddow documentary covers that in detail. So, and the question is, how much influence did policymakers have in not changing assessments, but making sure that the correct narrative was brought up? If you're an intelligence analyst in the bowels of CIA, and you know what's only going to get read is Iraq has WMD or Iraq is connected to Al-Qaeda, then that's going to influence the way you write a report or how you brief. So there might not have been direct political interference, but certainly political pressures forced certain actions to be taken. And this is a little bit chicken and the egg. We talked about all those collection and analytical failures about aluminum tubes and curveball, etc. But arguably, without that political pressure, those case studies would not have seen the light of day. They would have been buried in the bowels of CIA and DIA. So, what pressures did policymakers have? I'll let you decide. And then 9/11. So was 9/11 an intelligence failure? I argue pretty coherently, or I believe anyway, that we had data on 2 known al-Qaeda operatives that were in the United States, that had visas, that were communicating with a known bin Laden safe house. And I think that's the intelligence failure surrounding 9/11. What to do? Bin Laden determined to attack in the U.S. This comes an old policy question. Let's just say that you're briefing that question, bin Laden determined to attack in the U.S., and then your policymaker at that time, George Bush, comes back and asks you, what do you want me to do? The reason I bring this up is because that is such a vague, the documentary highlights it, but that's such a vague intelligence analysis point that it's almost impossible for a decision maker to make decisions based on that intelligence. So George Bush gets a lot of blame for this, but I don't think that he deserves to. I'll just say that. And then the organizational issues. And the NSA documentary brings this up really well, that there was information in part of our intelligence apparatus, but for whatever reason, it was not shared with the people that can actually do something about it. So that's an organizational failure. And then as you're going through it, again, I ask, where along the chain, and I outline that chain pretty well in the lectures, could 9/11 have been prevented? Could have been prevented at the beginning by having a safe house in Afghanistan or a safe sanctuary in Afghanistan. Could have been prevented with better visa and entrance requirements and scrutiny on that for people coming into our country. Could it have been at the aviation security area, where everything from properly checking in and watch listing people to reinforcing cockpit doors. So as you design an intelligence apparatus, think about, okay, a 9/11-like attack requires these 10 things to happen. Where could our security apparatus have intercepted that? Okay, so paper two is due next week. So I want to give the highlights. Strategic paper, so it's focused on the case studies. If you want to do another case study that we hadn't talked about in class, just let me know. I prefer you stick with the case studies we talked in class, but please let me know if you want to go outside those parameters. There's 2 wings. Allow you to go in depth on one of the case studies, and talk about either confessions and all those aspects of analytical failure or IRAC WMD. I'll allow you to do that in depth. Or if you want to talk about a particular issue, groupthink, and show how groupthink was evidenced in the case studies, I will allow you to do that. Or collection failures, and show how collection was poorly managed through multiple case studies. So you could do either one. I want to talk about some examples of papers. I just want to emphasize, I do not want a laundry list. I do not want a laundry list. I do not want a laundry list. So these are potential examples or potential theses that you can go with your papers. Collection failures, Pearl Harbor, the lack of aircraft carriers, or lack of knowing about the Japanese aircraft. The Yom Kippur War, which we talked about 2 weeks ago, about over-reliance on one source, HUMINT in the Yom Kippur War. The Iraq War, again, HUMINT, the curveball that you just talked about. Failures in analysis, again, Pearl Harbor. You can make the argument that there was just too much groupthink, too much lack of analytical power, too much racism that really forced the leaders, or the intelligence leaders and the military leaders, to underestimate the ability of Japan to launch a bold attack like they did in Pearl Harbor. The confessions, as we talked about a few weeks ago, groupthink, negative evidence, vividness bias, all of these elements were aspects of analytical failure regarding the confessions case study. And then finally, Iraq WMD, again, groupthink, negative evidence, vividness bias, all those same analytical failures that we just talked about were failures in analysis, if you're going to talk about the Iraq WMD case study. Politicization, policy interference. Again, Iraq WMD, as I just talked about. The confessions, where, again, there was pressure to get a conviction, and that is an element of politicization. And then the 9/11 case study that I just talked about, that information wasn't geared towards the policymakers so they can make decisions. And the doll goes in this in depth. And then finally, organizational failures. 9/11, the NSA documentary brings it up, that there was information at the highest points of our government, but it wasn't disseminated down to people that could actually do something about it. The Pearl Harbor case study. Again, this is the families of Kimmel and Short have brought up that information was collected at the federal level, at the organizational points, but it was not disseminated down to people that could actually, the commanders on the ground, that could actually make a difference. And then the fusion centers. You can talk about this if you want to talk about the 9/11 case study, where now, presumably, we have fusion centers across the country that are designed to push information at the federal level down to local and state municipalities that can, or state and local municipalities that can actually do something about it. So here's, again, this is a laundry list. Do not go through each one of these, but I want you to start thinking about where the failures are and what you can go down in more depth going forward. And again, we talked about, this isn't even just every one, but these are just some ideas to get your mind wrapped around, so you can, whether you're briefing or whether you're doing a case study, or whether you're doing a paper or briefing, this should help. For those of you who do the briefing, again, I'm looking for about 20 to 25 minutes, PowerPoint based. Do it on VoiceThread or Zoom or YouTube, whatever you find most helpful. And however you cooperate on that and however you work together is up to you. So that covers the guidance for the paper. If there's questions or issues, again, don't hesitate to reach out. If you want to call me, feel free to going forward. And then, of course, unfortunately, because we have this is a compressed course, there's no time to just focus on the papers. We have to keep going with the course. So week 5 is counterterrorism. The case studies are post 9/11 counterterrorism, I should say. Fort Hood, the underwear bomber, Boston, and EU. And if we want to add Capitol Hill, we can go ahead and do that as well if you want to be part of that course. So the readings, you have the Fort Hood shooting reading and then the Boston Marathon bombing reading. And you have 2 documentaries, great documentaries, Christmas Day Bomber and EU Terrorism, the PBS Frontline. And the question to think about as you're going through all this is, why do we still have these failures? Despite the millions, billions, trillions, depending on how you count it, dollars we've spent, why do we still have these inability to connect the dots and lack of information coordination going forward? So if there's questions or issues, let me know. And again, please let me know if you're interested in that Capitol Hill terrain walk. And we'll set up a time for those of you who can do it in person, and we'll set up a Zoom if you want to follow it online.